It was supposed to be just another ordinary morning at the police K-9 training grounds. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden glow over the field, and the rhythmic thud of boots mixed with the sharp command of officers filled the air. Officer Miller adjusted his cap, ready to run his partner, Max, a seasoned German shepherd, through their daily drills. Max was the best of the best, a dog trained to track criminals, find the lost, and protect the innocent. But that morning, something was off. Max kept pausing mid-run, his ears twitching, his head turning ever so slightly, as if he was aware of a presence just behind him. Miller followed his gaze, scanning the empty yard. Then he saw it. A tiny, golden-brown puppy, no bigger than a football, stood at the far end of the field. Its fur was tangled, its paws dusty, and yet its eyes were fixed entirely on Max. It didn't bark. It didn't wag its tail. It simply followed. Miller frowned. Stray dogs didn't just stroll into a secured police facility. And this one wasn't interested in food or people. It was interested in one dog. Every step Max took, the puppy mirrored, padding along silently, almost like a shadow that refused to let go. "All right, little guy, where'd you come from?" Miller murmured, but the puppy didn't blink, didn't look away. And in that moment, Officer Miller realized this wasn't random. The puppy wasn't lost. It had found Max for a reason. Officer Miller had been with the K-9 unit long enough to know that dogs rarely acted without a reason. Max was no exception. If he was distracted, it meant something, or someone had his attention. But Miller had never seen his partner look at another animal quite like this. The tiny golden-brown puppy stood just a few feet away now, paws planted firmly in the dirt. Its round eyes locked on Max like a soldier awaiting orders. It wasn't afraid, wasn't curious. It was focused, and that focus made Miller uneasy. "Max, heel," Miller commanded. The German shepherd obeyed, returning to Miller's side, but his gaze never left the puppy. His tail wasn't wagging. His stance wasn't playful. It was tense. And when the puppy took a tentative step closer, Max didn't growl or bark. Instead, he lowered his head, sniffed the air, and let out a quiet whine. That was unusual. Max never whined. Miller crouched down, studying the little dog more closely. Its fur was a mess. Dirt clung to it in patches, and there was a faint smell of dampness, like it had been outside all night. There was no collar, no tag, no obvious injury. But the puppy's eyes, they carried something Miller recognized all too well in rescued animals. Not fear, not confusion. Desperation. "Where's your owner, buddy?" Miller asked gently. But the puppy didn't even glance at him. It took another step toward Max, then another, and when it reached him, it pressed its tiny nose to Max's paw and let out a soft, pitiful sound, half whimper, half sigh. Max responded in a way that made Miller's chest tighten. He lowered himself slightly, almost bowing his head toward the puppy, and sniffed along its back. Then he looked up, not at Miller, but toward the chain-link fence at the far end of the training yard. Miller followed his gaze. Beyond the fence, the street stretched into the distance. The morning traffic hummed faintly, and a few pedestrians moved along the sidewalk. There was nothing unusual, or so Miller thought. The puppy stepped back, turned its head toward that street, then looked at Max again. Its tiny tail gave the faintest twitch, not from joy, but from urgency, like it was saying, "Come on, we don't have much time." Miller's brow furrowed. "Are you trying to lead us somewhere?" Max gave a sharp, low bark, a single sound, quick and decisive. Miller had heard that tone before. It was Max's alert bark. Not for danger, not for attack. This was the bark he used when he caught a scent worth following. The puppy began to move toward the fence, squeezing through a gap at the bottom. It glanced back once, making sure Max was still watching. "Miller to dispatch," he said into his radio. "Stepping off training ground for a possible animal call. Following K-9 lead. Copy that, Officer Miller," came the voice over the radio. Max was already at the fence, tail stiff, ears forward. Miller opened the gate, and the German shepherd stepped out into the street, his smaller shadow following close behind. They moved through the neighborhood at a steady pace. Max's strides were long but measured, the puppy trotting just ahead like a guide who knew exactly where it was going. They didn't pause for cars, for pedestrians, or for the tempting smells from a bakery they passed. The little one's head never turned. Every so often, it would glance back at Max, almost as if to check, "You're still with me, right?" Miller couldn't shake the feeling that he was in the middle of something bigger than a stray dog case. The city was full of abandoned pets. But this felt deliberate, coordinated, even. They passed into a quieter part of town. The sidewalks cracked with weeds, the buildings older and more worn. Faded graffiti marked brick walls, and a few windows were boarded shut. Miller's instincts kicked in. This was the kind of area where you kept your guard up. The puppy slowed for the first time as they approached an alleyway. Its steps became more careful, almost hesitant, but it kept moving forward. Max's pace matched it, his nose lowering toward the pavement. His breathing shifted, deeper, more controlled, his tracking mode. "What is it, boy?" Miller murmured. The alley opened into a narrow backstreet lined with old warehouses. The smell here was different. Damp concrete, rusted metal, and something else, something faint, almost hidden beneath the others. A musky animal scent. The puppy stopped in front of one warehouse door. It was old, its blue paint peeling, the metal frame flecked with rust. The pup sat down, staring at the door, then glanced at Max. Max sniffed along the bottom of the door, then turned to Miller, and that's when it happened. Max barked. Not a playful bark, not an alert bark. This was as we found something bark. Miller stepped forward, cautiously. "You're telling me they're in here?" Max barked again, shorter this time, then looked back at the puppy. The little one's eyes were wide, shimmering in the dim light of the alley. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. Miller felt his pulse quicken. His training told him to call for backup, but his gut told him something inside needed help, and fast. He tried the door. Locked, but there was a side entrance, half hidden behind a stack of old wooden pallets. He could see the metal latch was loose. Max moved toward it immediately, the puppy right behind him. Miller took a deep breath. Whatever was going on here, he knew one thing. The little golden brown dog hadn't been wandering aimlessly. It had come for Max. And Max was ready to find out why. The metal latch on the side door gave a reluctant creak as Miller eased it open. A faint beam of daylight cut into the darkness inside, revealing a long, dusty hallway that smelled of damp concrete and stale air. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped steadily, the sound echoing off the walls. Max stood at the threshold, his body rigid, ears forward, nose twitching rapidly. The puppy hovered right behind him, so close it nearly brushed against his hind leg. Miller's hand tightened on Max's harness. "Stay sharp, buddy," he whispered. They stepped inside. The shift from the cool morning air to the stale, heavy atmosphere inside the warehouse was immediate. Dust floated in the beam of Miller's flashlight as he swept it across the space. Old crates were stacked along the walls, some broken open, revealing scraps of rusted metal, torn fabric, and things that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. The puppy padded ahead a few steps, its tiny paws barely making a sound. It paused often, glancing back at Max, then at the shadows ahead, as if it knew exactly where it was going. Max moved with purpose now, his tracking instincts fully engaged. His head was low, his nose nearly brushing ground, tail held stiff for balance. Every so often, he'd stop and sniff the air, swiveling his head toward the far end of the hall. They passed through a doorway into a larger room, broken windows along the upper wall, let in weak shafts of light. Miller's boots crunched over scattered debris, bits of plaster, shattered glass, and old scraps of paper that had long since yellowed. Then Max froze. His entire body went still, one paw lifted mid-step. His ears twitched, his head turning slowly toward the far left corner of the room. "What is it, boy?" Miller whispered. That's when Miller heard it, too. It was faint. So faint he might have missed it if Max hadn't reacted first. A soft, muffled whimper. Not loud, not frantic, but persistent. The puppy let out a tiny bark, a high-pitched sound that seemed to echo unnaturally in the quiet. Then, without hesitation, it trotted straight toward the sound. Max followed in a heartbeat. They weaved through stacks of crates and rusted shelving units until they reached a tall pile of wooden pallets shoved up against the wall. The sound was clearer here, a soft, rhythmic crying. Miller knelt, angling his flashlight through a narrow gap between the pallets and the wall. His breath caught. Behind them, wedged into a small recess, was a cardboard box. Inside the box, barely visible under a thin layer of torn blankets, were puppies. 3 of them. They were tiny, no more than a few weeks old, and clearly malnourished. Their ribs showed faintly under patchy fur. One of them lifted its head weakly, its eyes cloudy from exhaustion. The golden-brown puppy squeezed through the gap instantly, pressing itself against the box and licking at the faces of the pups inside. Its little tail wagged once, just once, and then stilled again as it curled protectively around them. Miller felt his throat tighten. This wasn't just a stray that had wandered into the K-9 yard. This was a sibling or maybe a little guardian who had come looking for help. Max stood over the scene, his gaze fixed on the box. His usual alert stance softened. Slowly, he stepped forward and lowered his head, sniffing each puppy gently. Then he looked at Miller, his eyes wide, his breathing heavier. Miller had worked with Max long enough to recognize that look. This wasn't just concern. This was recognition. "You've seen this before, haven't you?" Miller murmured. A memory flickered in his mind. An old case file from years ago, back when Max was first found. He'd been discovered wandering the outskirts of town, circling a litter of abandoned puppies that didn't even belong to him. Max had refused to leave them until help arrived. The rescue team back then had said something Miller never forgot. This dog doesn't just protect, he chooses who to protect. The realization sent a shiver down Miller's spine. The golden brown pup must have known, somehow, that Max was the one who would understand. Max whined again, circling the box before laying down beside it, his large body curling in a protective arc. The little puppy tucked itself closer to him, pressing its face into his fur as if it had finally found safety. Miller pulled out his radio. "Dispatch! This is Officer Miller. I've got a situation. Multiple abandoned pups located inside an unsecured warehouse on Mill Street. Requesting animal rescue ASAP. Copy that, Miller. Sending unit and rescue team your way." As he ended the call, he noticed something odd near the box, a torn scrap of fabric lying on the floor. He picked it up and saw it was part of an old jacket sleeve. It smelled faintly of gasoline and something metallic, maybe oil. It didn't belong to the puppies. That much was clear. Someone had been here, and if they'd left the puppies in this state. Miller didn't like imagining what else they might have done. He looked around the warehouse again, his senses now on edge. The place was too quiet, too still, and the back door, he could see it from here, was slightly ajar. Miller to dispatch. Possible signs of recent human activity. Be advised. But his voice was low. The last thing he wanted was to scare the little ones, or alert anyone who might still be nearby. Max shifted slightly, glancing toward the open back door, then back at the puppies. His muscles were tense, his eyes sharp again. He was ready to defend them, if needed. The golden brown pup seemed to sense it too. It gave a faint growl, more vibration in its tiny chest than a sound, but its meaning was clear. "These are mine. You won't touch them." Miller stayed crouched, every instinct telling him the next moments could shift from rescue to confrontation. And somewhere outside, faint and distant, he thought he heard a footstep. The faint sound of footsteps outside made Miller's pulse quicken. He froze, holding his breath, listening. Was it real, or just the creak of an old building settling under its own weight? Max's head shot up, his ears pointed like radar dishes toward the sound. The golden brown puppy followed his gaze, its small body tense, ready to move or defend. Another sound, this time clearer, the crunch of gravel under a shoe. Miller's eyes flicked to the side entrance they had come through. Still closed. That meant whoever was out there was near the back of the warehouse, the same place where the rear door hung slightly ajar. He signaled Max with a hand gesture. "Stay." The German shepherd obeyed, though every fiber of his body looked ready to spring. Miller crept toward the back, flashlight off, relying on the dim natural light that bled in through broken window panes. The smell hit him before he reached the door. Cigarette smoke. Fresh. Someone had been here minutes ago, maybe was still here now. Miller reached the door and peeked outside. The alley was empty. A gust of wind swept a newspaper page across the cracked pavement. But there, just at the edge of the alley, were fresh footprints in the dust, large, heavy, and leading away toward the street. Whoever it was had left in a hurry. Relieved but still wary, Miller closed the door and slid the latch into place. If they came back, they'd have to break in. When he returned to the main room, the scene before him stopped him cold. Max had moved closer to the cardboard box, lying down fully so his body formed a protective wall between the puppies and the rest of the room. The golden brown pup was pressed against his side, its head resting on his foreleg, and the 3 tiny pups inside the box were no longer just huddled in fear. They were snuggled together, their eyes half closed, comforted by the warmth surrounding them. Max looked up as Miller approached, his deep brown eyes meeting Miller's with a mixture of urgency and something else, something softer. "You've done this before, haven't you, buddy?" Miller said quietly. He crouched down to inspect the puppies more closely. 2 of them were breathing shallowly, their bellies sunken. The third was a little stronger, but clearly malnourished. The golden brown puppy nudged them one by one, licking their faces, as if counting them, making sure each was still there. Miller's flashlight caught something on the floor beside the box. A small, rusty food can. Empty. It was dented, old, and smelled faintly of something spoiled. This was all they'd been left with. The weight of that cruelty settled heavy in his chest. Someone had deliberately abandoned them here. No food, no water, no chance to escape. The golden brown puppy must have wandered out, searching desperately for help, and somehow, against all odds, had found Max. Miller's radio crackled. "Rescue unit approaching your location, Miller. ETA 3 minutes. "Copy that," he replied, glancing toward the door. 3 minutes. That was all they had to wait. But in those 3 minutes, something unexpected happened. Max shifted slightly and lowered his head toward the smallest pup in the box, the one that had been breathing the weakest. He licked its face gently, nudging it until its tiny eyes fluttered open. The little one let out the faintest squeak, and Max responded with a low, soothing whine. Miller watched in silence, his throat tightening. It wasn't just that Max cared. It was the way he cared. Slow, deliberate, protective, like he understood exactly what these tiny creatures needed to survive. The golden brown puppy seemed to understand too. It copied Max's behavior, curling even closer and pressing its body heat against the smallest pup. In that moment, Miller saw it clearly, the unspoken connection between them. Max wasn't just responding to a distress call. This was personal. The sound of tires crunching on gravel snapped Miller out his thoughts. A white van marked Animal Rescue pulled up outside the side entrance. 2 rescuers in bright vests stepped out, carrying blankets and small kennels. "They're in here," Miller called softly, waving them in. When they entered the room, Max stood but didn't move far. His eyes followed every motion, his posture making it clear. "You can take them, but I'm watching you." The rescuers moved slowly, speaking in low voices as they approached the box. One knelt beside it and gently lifted the smallest pup, wrapping it in a soft fleece blanket. The others followed, each swaddled and placed into a warm kennel. The golden brown puppy didn't protest. It simply stayed close until the last one was lifted, then stepped back to stand beside Max. One of the rescuers looked at Miller. "If you hadn't found them today, they wouldn't have made it through the night." Miller nodded, glancing at Max. "It wasn't me who found them." The rescuer smiled faintly, giving the golden brown pup a soft pat. "Smart little one." Most strays would run from a police dog, but this one knew exactly who to follow. When the kennels were secured in the van, the golden brown puppy was lifted last. It hesitated for a moment, looking up at Max with wide eyes. Max stepped forward, touching his nose gently to the pup's head. It was the softest, briefest gesture, but it said everything. The rescuer carried the puppy out to the van. Max watched until it disappeared from sight, his ears still tilted toward the sound of the doors closing. Miller knelt beside him, giving his neck a firm rub. "You did good, boy. You did real good." As the van drove away, the echo of tiny whimpers fading into the distance, Miller couldn't shake the image of Max lying protectively beside that box of pups. And though the immediate danger had passed, he had the unshakable feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. Because Max didn't forget. And if there was more to find, if there was someone out there who had done this, Max would be ready to track them down. Miller watched the rescue van drive away, its taillights shrinking until they vanished around the corner, leaving the alley silent once more. The sound of tiny whimpers had faded, but the echo of them still lingered in his ears. Max stood beside him, his gaze locked on the empty street, ears tilted forward as if straining to hear something that was no longer there. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The warehouse behind them was just a shell now, quiet, lifeless, but what they'd found inside would stay with both of them. Miller gave a quiet command, and Max turned to follow him back toward the SUV. But his steps were slower, more deliberate, his head still turning toward the direction the van had gone. It was as if a piece of him had gone with those little lives he had guarded so fiercely. The next morning, the training yard felt unusually empty. Max went through the motions of his drills, but his focus wasn't there. His eyes kept flicking toward the gate every time it opened, and when no small golden-brown figure came running in, his ears would lower just slightly before he returned to the task. Miller noticed it all. He didn't say anything, but he knew. Max was waiting in a way only someone who had protected and cared for another could wait. Quietly, patiently, but with a hope that wouldn't fade. By the afternoon, Miller couldn't ignore it anymore. He signed Max out of the K-9 unit for an unscheduled visit and drove across town toward the small rescue center. As soon as they turned onto the street, Max's posture changed, ears high, tail rising, his body leaning forward in anticipation. By the time Miller parked, Max was already whining softly, his nose pressed to the window. Inside the shelter, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh bedding. The receptionist glanced up and smiled knowingly. "I had a feeling you'd be back," she said. "They've been asking for you in their own way." She led them down a short hallway to a quiet room where a large pen had been set up. Inside, the 3 smaller puppies were curled together in a warm heap, fast asleep on a blanket. Sitting a little apart, eyes locked on the doorway, was the golden-brown puppy. The instant it saw Max, it erupted into life, tail whipping back and forth, paws scrabbling against the pen, high-pitched yelps filling the room. Max answered with a deep, low bark that carried something between joy and relief. When the pen door opened, the puppy shot forward like a spark, running straight to Max and pressing its head against his chest. Max bent his head low, sniffing and licking the pup in slow, deliberate motions, checking it over as if to make sure it was unharmed. The smaller siblings, now awake, stumbled toward him, their tiny legs unsteady but determined. Max laid down so they could reach him, curling his body protectively around all 4, just as he had in that cold, dark warehouse. Miller stood back, letting the moment unfold, and that's when he saw it, Max's eyes glistening in the light. He blinked slowly, but the moisture didn't go away. Silent, unshakable tears were gathering in his gaze. Miller swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult to speak. "You did it, boy," he murmured. "They're safe because of you." They stayed like that for a while, no commands, no training, just a steady rhythm of breathing, the soft sound of tails thumping against the floor. Eventually, the shelter staff began gathering the pups back into their pen. The 3 smallest were lifted gently and placed back in the blanket nest. The golden-brown puppy hesitated, pressing against Max one last time before allowing itself to be picked up. Max reached forward, touching his nose to the pup's head in a gesture so subtle, yet so full of meaning that Miller felt it in his chest. 2 weeks later, the call came from the shelter. The smaller puppies had all been adopted into loving homes, but the golden-brown pup was still waiting. Miller didn't even pause to think. He filled out the adoption paperwork that day. When he walked into the shelter to collect her, Max was right by his side, and the moment the pup saw him, she ran as if no time had passed. From that day forward, she had a name, Sunny, and she had a place in their family. Life adjusted naturally. Sonny was an official working dog, but she was inseparable from Max. She followed him everywhere, through the yard, into the patrol SUV, even lying down in the same exact position during breaks. It was as though she was learning from him, studying his every move, preparing herself for the days she might need to be a protector instead of protected. Miller often caught them in moments of quiet connection, Max resting with his head draped over her small frame, Sonny nestled so close it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Months later, on a crisp autumn morning, they were parked at the edge of a wooded trail, ready for a light training exercise. Miller sat in the driver's seat, watching to the mirror as Max lay in the back. Sonny curled tightly against him. The trees outside swayed in the wind, scattering gold and crimson leaves across the ground. And for a moment, Miller thought about the chain of events that had brought them all here. A determined little pup who refused to give up, a seasoned police dog with an unspoken past, and a single moment of instinct that changed everything. Some would call it chance. Miller didn't believe that for a second. He'd seen the look in Max's eyes the day Sonny found him. He'd seen the tears. And he knew with absolute certainty that it hadn't been just a rescue. It had been a reunion.